So what was this wonderful new theory? How does Darwin explain the appearance of new and different species? Before we can answer that question, let's follow the route that led Darwin to his answers.
In the Galapagos Islands in the South Pacific, Darwin had noticed that the islands housed different species of finches. Some lived exclusively on seeds and nuts on the ground, whereas others occupied the trees and ate insects or fruit. All of them possessed beaks appropriate to their diet, long and pointed or compact and heavy. Darwin suspected that these separate species were variations of one original species of finch, which had blown across from the Pacific coast of South America. Perhaps the original finch had also evolved from a common ancestor of bird, which may not have been a finch at all. Indeed, we now know that all birds evolved from dinosaurs. The key factor relates to variation within a species. It is the same with all animals. No two cows or sheep are identical. There are always slight differences between them, and it's on these differences that natural selection takes place. Each species produces a greater number of offspring in each generation than can possibly survive on the available space and food supply. Competition for places to live, for food and for mates leads to conflict. Those that lose may die of starvation or illness. Predators may eat the rest. Taken together, a wild animal's life is a constant struggle for existence. Those that do survive will mate and pass on to the next generation those attributes that help them to win the struggle.
Another very important ingredient in Darwin's theory for new species to form is geographical isolation. For example, lions and tigers are thought to have evolved from one common carnivore ancestor.
At some point, some of these ancestors became isolated in Asia from those in Africa. Over the course of thousands of years, their external appearance altered in response to the different habitats of lions and tigers. Lions live in wide open savannas where the ground is parched and brown. Therefore, those that were born with the skin colour most closely matching the earth were more likely to survive and breed and evolve into lions. Meanwhile, those in Asia, who had a stripy element to their fur, would have had a greater chance of survival among the trees and evolved into tigers. A modern example of evolution in Britain relates to the peppered moth. This species was originally a light greyish colour, but with a small proportion of dark-coloured individuals. After the Industrial Revolution began, the light-coloured moths living in the cities were gradually replaced by dark-coloured moths.
Pause the tape and see if you can work out how this happened using the theory of natural selection as your guide.
Well, as you probably worked out, when the British countryside near cities became blackened by smoke from industrial processes, the lighter moths, which were previously well disguised against light-coloured tree trunks, were easily picked off by birds. The dark moths survived because they were camouflaged against the darkened trees.
Within approximately 100 years, the moth population living near cities had evolved from white to black.
Now, to summarise the theory, an animal's individual survival depends on its ability to solve many problems. The most important of these are its ability, firstly, to compete with other members of its species for a place to live. It must compete with other members of the same species for food to eat. It must compete with other members of its own species for mates in order to reproduce. And it must also protect itself against predators and accidents. The characteristics that help the individual to win the struggle for survival will be passed on to the next generation. But if some of the individuals of a species become isolated and the environment in which they find themselves changes, then the characteristics needed to exist will also change. Those endowed with these characteristics will survive and pass them on to the next generation. Soon, the isolated group will be varied enough from the original group that they can no longer interbreed and a new species is formed.
We said at the beginning that Lamarck's theory, which gave explanation for the existence of long necks in giraffes, has long since been discredited. Now, see if you can give Darwin's, using natural selection as your guide.
Even when they had short necks way back in evolutionary time, there were variations of neck length. Since giraffes use their necks in combat, those males with the longest necks in the group would have fought off shorter-necked males. The winners would have gained free access to leaves high in the trees and the first choice of female mates. In the next generation, a greater proportion of giraffes will be born with relatively long necks. Again, the tallest males in the group will dominate on access to food and mates. And so the process has continued through thousands of generations until giraffes have stabilized on a height which matches that of the tallest trees in their environment.